Hello, BookTube. The weather has returned to normal here in Boston. Yesterday it was bright skies and sunny and relatively warm. Today it is dark and freezing cold and pouring rain. And yesterday was a temptation. Lots and lots of people went out and about. It was a weekend day. It was high blue skies and everything was in bloom. And I went out, of course, for a bit with Frida Bean for a walk. And so did my surly houseboy. And he was out for a long time. And at one point, he fell and badly scraped, maybe a little bit sprained, one of his appendages. And when he made it back here in one piece, and we discovered that there are not even rudimentary first aid stuff here at Hyde Cottage. There wasn't anything to help him. And he didn't care. He was disgusted with himself and tired, so he just went off to bed. And today is different. I mean, the morning after a scrape like that is going to hurt a lot more. It's going to be a lot stiffer. And we needed something. And I certainly wasn't going to have him go out and walking around finding it. So despite the fact that it was cold and dark and pouring rain, I did the deed myself. I went out, it's the thing you do. So I went to what our UK friends would call the high street of this little town. and I figured since I was out and about and I had water collecting in my shoes, I might as well reward myself by going to used bookstores. So I did. And I'm back now, and I want to share these things with you, although share is entirely hypothetical, because when it's raining like this, the Wi-Fi here tends to stop working. So I don't know when this will be uploaded, but I figure I'll make the video anyway and show you the books that I found. I found, let's see, 6 books, and the first one was a romance. Wasn't expecting to find any romance. It's not that kind of a shop, but this is by Amanda Forrester, who I feel certain I have read before. Oh, I have. Okay, I've read both of her previous books. She wrote A Wedding in Springtime and A Midsummer Bride, and the book I found continues that, but it's not one that I have read. It's a winter wedding. All of her books are designed like that. They all look like that. And this is just a Regency romance set that follows. I'm pretty sure that I'm going to be okay. I remember those first 2 books, and I might even still have them here. I'll have to check around and see. But this one is the Duke of Marchford requires a suitable bride, but catching spies for the Foreign Office takes up most of his time. So he goes to a matchmaking service, and the woman who runs the matchmaking services considers him to be quite the challenge because he's not easy to make a match with. And you can guess the rest of the plot, right? She ends up falling in love with him herself. But so I'm finding a nice, pleasant romance was a great start for a very dismal day. And then this next one is a mass market classic. I occasionally go, I swear off mass market paperbacks occasionally because they even though they are a perfect piece of technology, they cannot be improved in their current form. I've just come to like trade paperbacks or even hardcovers better. They seem easier to read to me, even though they're a little bulkier. But I don't make a religion out of that. So if I find a mass market classic that is an edition I really like, I will get it. And this is definitely one of those. This is Christopher Ricks's edition of Milton's Paradise Lost, which he put in this edition with Paradise Regained, which is a much shorter and much less powerful epic poem that is sort of a companion piece to Milton's Paradise Lost. And I had this very same paperback edition ages ago. I think I taught from it at one point just to hand it out to the class. And I don't think there's any comparison really between the vision and the power of these 2 poems, but I kind of like the symmetry of having them together in one volume. And as soon as I saw it, I realized I didn't have this, so I grabbed it as well. Needless to say, all of these things were dirt cheap, and just dirt cheap. This next one is Penguin Trade Paperback. This is by Joseph Persico, and it is Nuremberg, Infamy on Trial. And it's just his narrative account of the Nuremberg trials. And that's a fascinating subject. I have 4 or 5 books that either touch on it or do this exact same thing, but I don't think I have his. I haven't actually dug around in the history bookshelves to see whether or not I duplicated anything. But considering this was 25 cents, I don't really care. I remember reading this, and I remember really, really liking it. But it's been a while. I could stand to read it again. Then these next 2 were our UK trade paperbacks. which I just love. I just love UK trade paperbacks. Something about the quality of the paper, something about the quality of the binding, something about the size. I look at a UK trade paperback of anything, fiction or nonfiction, new or old, and I think, especially new books, I think what I wouldn't give if all new books came in this format. And that was that. They were just, $12 American or whatever, and that was that. What I wouldn't give, as opposed to a new book that is this, where it's a heavy hardcover with a dust jacket that, I mean, I guess it has a certain kind of appeal, certainly for durability's sake, but I infinitely prefer a nice, big, heavy, sturdily made trade paperback. And I found two of them, of books that I've already read, but that I really like and that I don't have. So it was perfect. It feels a little bit of a guilty pleasure when I find a UK trade paperback of something that I already have and get it anyway just for the format. That always feels a little bad. And I don't have either one of these, so these will now be my copies of them. The first one is a Matthew Shardlake novel. This is C.J. Sansom. This is Lamentation. These beautiful UK trade paperbacks. What I wouldn't give to have all of them in these big things. Of course, the Shardlake novels got bigger. They keep getting bigger as they go along. And this one is my favorite of the whole run. This is Matthew Shardlake is a lawyer in London, but even though he is a friend and a former confidant of Catherine Parr, who has become King Henry VIII's sixth and final wife, he still doesn't want anything to do with court. He views it rightly as a poisonous and dangerous place. But in this novel, he is drawn back into court at the specific request of Catherine Parr, because unbeknownst to anyone, she has written a book, the Book of Lamentations, that is fiercely Protestant, fiercely revisionist in its religious views, and she did it out of conviction, but it has gone missing. And she's terrified that her husband is going to find out about it, that Henry VIII is going to learn about it, and that the rival factions at court would use it, and him would prey on Henry to have her and all of her friends and relations killed. And she wants Shardlake to find it, and the stakes are upped considerably because one torn out page from that book is found in the possession of a dead man, a murdered man. I think C.J. Sansom clearly loves writing historical fiction and isn't always all that concerned with the tautness of a mystery plot, hence the huge size of these novels. They're a weird phenomenon. No other murder series that I know of has been allowed to become like this. And I love it, don't get me wrong. I think they're fantastic reading experiences. But in this book, I think more effectively than any of the others, combines those two things, the sweep of a historical novel and the tautness of an actual thrilling plot. That most of these books don't do that. The first one did, Dissolution, but most of them don't. Most of them, especially the bigger ones, the later ones, are mainly just historical novels with a kernel here and there of a murder mystery or a thriller thrown in. This, I think, combines them best of all, and it's in this nice, big, sturdy UK trade paperback. What I wouldn't give to have them all like this. But the next one is History. A historian that a lot of you will know. You've seen him on this channel many times. He's one of my favorite living historians. This is Anthony Beevor, and this is his book on Berlin in 1945. The downfall of the city, the final days of the war in the West. And he just, this big, beautiful UK trade paperback. He just does what he does. He goes through people by people, rung of society by rung of society, all sorts of primary documents to get the reader onto the ground and into the cellars. You get tons and tons. He does, the sweeping narrative history that you expect from a book like this, but he heavily peppers it with personal stories, all the way from Hitler and Eva Braun and all of these Nazi officials who are killing themselves left, right, and center, all the way down to the ordinary people. And it's a terrific reading experience. So, and I haven't read his Berlin book in a long time. I haven't read it probably since it first came out. Again, I was glad to find these things, and I was glad that they weren't indulgences. They aren't doubles. They can just go on the shelf the way they are. And then the last one is a hardcover that I got. I got an advance copy of it before I had this channel. Then I got a finished copy of it and read it both times, reviewed it. It made a year-end list for excellent books that I have on my Steve Reads book blog, and then it went away. I never got the trade paperback, if there was one. I don't even know off the top of my head if there was one. But as I mentioned on this channel before, the life cycle of books like that is that I get the advance copy, I get the finished copy, I deal with the finished copy one way or another. Either I read it and review it, or I decline to review it. And then a year later, 2 years later, I get the trade paperback if the thing has a paperback release. And then years pass, and maybe at a used bookstore or a charity shop of some kind, I will find the book again. And if I'm well disposed towards it, I will then read it. I will get it for $1 or $2 and read it again and decide whether or not I want to keep it in my collection. It's only a handful, a tiny handful of books where I know right away that I want to keep them in my collection. Otherwise, I let time sort it out. And this was one of those, and it was not expected. This was edited by Andrew Jewell and Yanni Stout, and it is the Selected Letters of Willa Cather. Great big, heavy, beautiful thing that I liked a lot when I first read it. And I want to read it again. I had a lot of thoughts about it that have been swirling around in my head ever since. Willa Cather is an American author I've never particularly liked. Her fiction I've never particularly liked, even though she won the Pulitzer Prize, even though she's taught in schools and will be forever. I've always been frustrated a little because her two most famous books, O Pioneers and My Antonia, I don't think are her best ones. They're certainly not what she won the Pulitzer Prize for, and I think her best fiction, it's weird. It's a weird dislocation. Her best fiction, I think, that at least that struck me, wasn't the stuff that for which she was renowned, and that's always a weird feeling. And when I read this originally, I thought two things. One, the next time a really attractive complete set of Willa Cather is reprinted, whether it's Penguin or Modern Library or whatever, as soon as somebody does a set like that where they reprint everything, not just O Pioneers and My Antonia, then I will read her all. I will read all of her and see if my opinion goes up of her prose just in general. That was the first thing I thought. Second thing I thought was that despite the title, this is by far the best biography of Willa Cather that I've ever read. In most cases, that isn't true. Most cases, you sort of need the biographer to sort of draw all the threads together and give you the bigger picture. And most of the time, that can't be done by the little curator paragraphs at the beginning of every letter. But in this case, the editors do such a fantastic job that it does work. That larger narrative element does work, and so you get Willa Cather telling her story. And it's I am certain that I'm going to keep this now, as opposed to scattering it to the winds again. And I'm certain that it's going to go on the biography shelf, not anywhere else. This is effectively that. So who knew that I would find a thing like this in a little shop in the middle of nowhere? It was a good book day, believe it or not, even though it's a Sunday and it was dark, it was cold, it was rainy, and I was on an errand of mercy. Even though all of that is true, I still managed to squeeze in some books, and I had some good finds. So to do a Steve Pyramid, we have the Selected Letters of Willa Cather. I strongly recommend this if you see this volume. Actually, I recommend most of these. Then Berlin by Anthony Beevor. He's fantastic anyway, but this story has particular pathos. I mean, this is Berlin in 1945 is the price that Germany paid for Hitler, and that is, Beevor spares nothing. He spares you nothing. So, and then Lamentation by C.J. Sanson, a great big fat Tudor historical novel. It is my favorite in the series so far. Just love it. I've loved from the beginning. I've loved the way this series sort of centers around, revolves around, touches base with Catherine Parr, who is, in my opinion, by far the most interesting of Henry's wives, and one of my favorite figures in Tudor history. So it's always nice to see. And then Nuremberg by Joseph Persico, more World War II Nazi history, in this case a slightly beaten up Penguin trade paperback from America. I naturally, when I was looking at these things, I thought how nice it would be to have this like this. The Penguin edition of Persico's Nuremberg is probably a lot prettier than the American version, but even so, I remember really liking the book. There are 2 or 3 must-read books on the trial of Nuremberg, and this is one of them. Then two mass market paperbacks, Paradise Lost and Paradise Regained, which was a little bit ratty. I had to reinforce it even before I made this video, but I kind of like this edition. Of course, the notes are fantastic because Christopher Ricks he's amazing. He's just amazing as an editor. He's amazing. And lastly, a romance, A Winter Wedding, by Amanda Forrester. And I will see, as soon as I turn off the camera, I will see how much Amanda Forrester I have. I don't know if I have any. I don't know if I have those first 2 books. I hope I do. But I'm going to read this one anyway, even if I don't. So there you go. A Sunday book haul. Who knew? But I'm going to wrap this up. But I will be back. Thank you, BookTube.